Asymmetrical Haircuts Justice Update with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg in partnership with justiceinfo.net.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
Well, it's all kicked off again here in The Hague. Yesterday, Thursday, we're recording now on Friday, the International Criminal Court judges in the pre-trial chamber, one of them there, issued arrest warrants, the ones that we've all been waiting for. So a great opportunity for a Stephopedia. Tell us all about it, Steph.
Yeah, if you could see me now, if this was a video instead of a radio, you'd see me looking slightly frazzled and sitting in a little phone booth at Humanity Hub in The Hague because I'm running around everywhere these days. So you might hear a change in sound quality because I didn't bring all the things that I, of course, should have. But my brain cell was left at home this morning, I think.
Okay, gather your brain cells, woman, and tell us, who are these arrest warrants for and what are they for? I'm relying on you.
How did we get here? Well, what happened yesterday in the afternoon was that the ICC issued a statement that judges had decided that they would issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, his former defense minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas leader Mohammed Deif. They are all accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the Gaza conflict. And of course, in my understanding of the Gaza conflict, I begin that at October 7.
Let's just remind everybody why we know it isn't the time that the conflict completely started, but why do we use October 7th? Just remind everybody what happened.
So, of course, the Israel-Palestinian conflict is an ongoing conflict for many, many years. But this latest thing that we call the Gaza conflict intensified on October 7 when Hamas crossed over the border from Gaza and attacked Israeli civilians in the border region.
We know that more than 1,000 Israelis were killed there and a couple of hundred at least were taken hostage. But then since then, we've seen the massive attack by Israel on Gaza, where many, many thousands of Palestinians have died, many women and children, civilians, as well as Hamas members as well. And as journalists, we're not allowed into Gaza to see what's going on. So it's also partly via the courts that we're hearing any of the details of this. But anyway, back to the arrest warrant stuff. Keep going on your Stephopedia.
Well, in the arrest warrants are still secret, so we don't know. So all we can rely on is a kind of summary of the court in what it says that the judges have decided. But they say that the judges felt there is reasonable grounds to believe Netanyahu and Gallant were criminally responsible for acts including murder, persecution, and starvation as a weapon of war, as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Gaza. And of course, that widespread and systematic, our listeners will know you need that for the crimes against humanity. Now, they really lifted out the starvation thing. That is what underpins these charges. The judges said there were reasonable grounds to believe that the blockade on Gaza and lack of food, water, electricity, fuel, and medical supplies, quote, created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the death of civilians, including children, due to malnutrition and dehydration.
And what about on the Hamas side, the warrant against Mohammed Deif?
So Deif was the leader of Hamas's military wing, and he is charged with mass killing or extermination during the October 7 attacks on Israel that triggered the Gaza war, and also charges of rape, taking of hostages, and torture. The problem with the warrant against Deif is that Israel has said it killed Deif in an airstrike in July, but Hamas has neither confirmed nor denied, and the prosecutor could also not confirm his death, but will continue to gather information. But in the meantime, we have this arrest warrant.
I managed to persuade Sergei Vasiliev, who's a professor at the Open University in the Netherlands, to give us his first take last night.
The battle for the soul of the International Criminal Court and of international criminal justice as a whole has been won, I think. But the battle for the body of international criminal law is just beginning.
So we're going to flesh that out a bit as we go. But Steph, why don't you take us a little bit behind the scenes? I mean, you're part of a big newsroom, the Reuters newsroom. I wonder what happens from your perspective when a story like this breaks. I remember, here we go again, being in the BBC in the 1980s in the World Service newsroom. And if a news agency had huge news, it would come through the telex machine. My God, that ages me, doesn't it? Which was preceded, if it was really huge, by 5 bells. So that's the assassination of a US president type of news. Was this a 5 bells incident for you?
Yeah, this is absolutely a 5-bell situation for us. We call that an alert. The good thing about this is that, of course, we had known that the prosecutor had asked for these arrest warrants to be issued and knew some of the background. So for months, I have kind of had the prep ready at what I thought the court would decide, and then make all kinds of different scenarios where I wrote up a lot of the copy in advance, hoping that it would turn out to happen as I predicted. And I was lucky that it did. So a lot of that copy was already pre-written. And so I didn't have a lot of stress as when something unexpected happened. But for me, it was still unexpected timing. So I can tell you that I was actually in the optometrist about to be fitted for new glasses and kind of heard all this buzzing in my bag and looked at it and basically looked stricken at the optometrist and said, "I can't explain. I have no time. I have to leave now. I have an emergency," and ran out. So that poor man is probably thinking that somebody died and I had to run out. But that is how I left it. So my new glasses will have to wait a little bit.
Of course, we've got lots that we need to get into, including, as you say, what we don't know, and also some of the sort of more technical stuff, what the judges said about jurisdiction. What we do know is that it took 6 months, a whole load of complaining on social media, a whole load of backwards and forwards, and a whole load of memes that I kept on seeing. But now we have this, I don't know, early Christmas present. ASP, we've got the Assembly of States parties coming up present. So let's take it stage by stage. Here's Sergei's summary of what we do know.
The summary is rather lengthy. They do specify for which crimes those arrest warrants were issued in case of Netanyahu, Gallant, not in case of Deif. They also specify the mode of liability. For example, for Netanyahu and Gallant, it was co-perpetratorship with respect to the war crime of starvation, also crimes against humanity, of murder, persecution, other inhumane acts, and under the title of superior responsibility. As civilian leaders, there are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Netanyahu and Gallant are responsible as superiors for the war crime of intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population.
So they're not the full arrest warrants because those are secret, but summaries of the reasoning and summaries of exactly what they are charged with.
The degree of detail that is provided in the summary is adequate, I think, considering the importance of this procedural step, considering the fact that the warrant texts themselves are not yet available. It is important for the judges to indicate on which basis they reach the conclusion that there are reasonable grounds to believe that these individuals bear criminal responsibility, and also with respect to a notable omission from this list of crimes, extermination. For example, they specified that based on the evidence that the prosecution provided, they could not establish reasonable grounds to believe that all elements of this crime against humanity were met. They basically said that there were reasonable grounds to believe that the conditions that were created, among others, by those individuals in Gaza, this element was met, but perhaps when it comes to the intentional infliction of those conditions, they found that this element was lacking.
So it's important to note that the evidence only covers up until the middle of May this year. And of course, things keep on changing on the ground in Gaza.
Of course, it does not preclude in the future from bringing additional evidence in order to corroborate this charge. Most likely, the OTP would do that. They might disagree with this preliminary finding concerning extermination. And I can also imagine that there are further charges in the pipeline. Because the picture that we are getting from the summary now, it is only the state of affairs up to 20 May. And as we know, many things haven't seen. So I don't think it will be the end of the story.
And the backstory to all of this is that there was a torturous process. We had a lot of procedural developments and interventions that were unexpected and which definitely slowed down the proceedings a bit. There were several dozen organizations and states from both sides that got to hand in amicus curiae, friend of the court, filings on jurisdiction. And we asked Sergei about this, and he has views, capital V, on this.
The judges did not consider it necessary to address jurisdiction, admissibility issues. They also rejected Israelis' challenge to jurisdiction, which basically makes me question, was that whole circus of amicus curiae submissions over the summer really necessary? In my view, and you may have read something I've written on this, this whole procedure was unnecessary and nonsensical, and it was also mismanaged. And it's hard to say how many weeks of delay were added, but I'm pretty sure that all the participants in the process, including the judges, had to read additional several hundred pages, which they did not really need in order to make this determination of whether or not there are reasonable grounds to believe that these individuals committed crimes and whether their arrest was necessary.
So, big breath. Now what? What actually happens next?
The job of the judges of the pretrial chamber is now done. So I think the ball now is in the state's parties' court. They would need to make sure that those decisions are, if not executed, at least are respected. And we have already heard from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands that there's no question about enforcing these warrants. So if Mr. Netanyahu or Mr. Gallant would consider coming to the Netherlands, we know that they would be awaited here with open arms in order to be arrested.
Yeah, state reactions is where it is at now. I know that you have been looking a little bit, but Stephanie, can you maybe summarize any particular states and what they've been saying?
What was interesting to me was that the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, Casper Veldkamp, was straight out of the gate, because he was in Parliament when this happened, to say, yes, the Netherlands is going to respect the ICC arrest warrants and we will arrest Netanyahu if he comes in the Netherlands. But of course, he also has to deal in some way with Geert Wilders, the populist leader who is not actually in government in the Netherlands, but he is the leader of the party, of the biggest party in the Netherlands, which is in the government coalition, just not with Wilders at the helm. And Wilders, he was quiet for a while about it, but this morning he tweeted that that the arrest warrants were horrendous and that he would come and meet his good friend Netanyahu in Israel soon. So, while the Dutch government does what it should in regards to the Netherlands as a member state of the ICC, Geert Wilders, who also wields considerable political influence, says something quite different.
And just as a side note, Casper used to be the Netherlands ambassador in Israel. So if he had been in that post, he would be the one receiving Wilders and taking Wilders to visit Netanyahu. So, I mean, I was just thinking on this kind of meta level as you were talking about it. But I suppose we should also say, what's the reaction been of the United States?
Well, the U.S. President Joe Biden, as was expected, really had a massive condemnation of the arrest warrants and made the point again that this somehow creates an equivalence between what Israel is doing and what Hamas did on October 7. Now, we know what legal scholars have to say about that, or a lot of legal scholars, but that was an obvious U.S. reaction. From Canada, Trudeau said, yes, we must do what the ICC says. They're also an ICC member state. In the UK, Yvette Cooper has refused to say what she's going to do. France seemed to be quite positive that they would uphold their duties under the Rome Statute yesterday, but I heard today that there was a slight kind of rowing back, softening their tone, saying now they issued a statement that they take note of the decision. Italy has said that it would carry out any arrest warrants, and Germany, famously another staunch ally of Israel at the moment, is not said anything yet. And so we get a lot of, some say, yes, we must do the arrest warrant. There are some saying prosecutors independent, we take note. And there's some heavy condemnations, and that seems to be the flavors that we have with this.
I thought that I'd also ask Sergei about what kinds of pushback we might expect from Israel and from the United States. I've certainly seen what I would call a rally around the flag reaction in Israel, where there's been widespread condemnation across the political spectrum. But what exactly will they do?
In terms of pushback, yes, several layers of pushback can be expected. First of all, I do think that Israel would immediately appeal the decision regarding jurisdiction. It is, of course, debatable whether the decision is subject to appeal without leave of the pretrial chamber, but I do think that they will try that. Because basically here, the decision that pretrial chamber made concerns a jurisdictional issue, you might claim, and it may be appealed to the appeals chamber directly. So most likely this would happen unless Israel just gives up and says, okay, I don't want to try my chances here. Of course, I don't want to give them ideas, but I do expect some pushback there. And of course, the most important and scary aspect would be the political blowback. Because we know that the outgoing U.S. administration was not a great fan of this idea of arrest warrants against Israeli leadership being issued, nor can you expect that the successor, the new occupant of the White House, would be very amused by that. And even if Israel does not see any legal remedies left or quasi-legal remedies left, they'll most likely use all the political leverage they got left in order to subvert the work of the court, in order to fight it in every manner possible. So, as I already stated on Twitter, unfortunately, all we have witnessed so far, all this circus with the process towards the issuance of arrest warrants, this was the easiest part. And now the hard part comes.
And of course, we do have another very important arrest warrant on the books of the ICC, which we've spoken a lot about, and that's the one against Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, in relation to the situation in Ukraine. And I thought maybe it'd be interesting to ask Sergei about the kind of contrast in reactions that we might have around these two different arrest warrants.
The contrast could not have been starker, I would say, in terms of how the whole process went, how it was managed, how much time, blood, sweat, and tears it took, if you compare the two situations. In Ukraine, we have already 6 warrants. The warrant against the supreme ruler of the Russian Federation was issued within a matter of 3 weeks. So here we had to wait for 6 months and 1 day, while terrible atrocities, quite possibly genocide, were happening before our very eyes. But now I think with this decision, the credibility of the International Criminal Court has been partially restored. Now we've seen that the prosecutor has done his job, the judges have done their job, not without difficulties and delays and even departures from the chamber, but they did it.
When we spoke, I think, at the beginning of this year, we already said that this would be a year where double standards would be one of the watchwords, and that's really borne out, and we see that as well. These are both cases where politics takes such a large role that you could really see that.
So, should we actually expect these arrest warrants to be enforced anytime soon? I mean, like us, Sergei says no.
When it comes to the enforcement of these warrants, I don't think we can expect Gallant and Netanyahu see the inside of the courtroom anytime soon. And the same goes for Vladimir Putin, but it's quite important to bear witness to Netanyahu basically being pushed into the same boat, which also houses now Vladimir Putin. So they are now basically in the same situation, in the same position. They are ICC suspects, potentially fugitives from international justice. I don't know how Benjamin Netanyahu would play this. Most likely he will be in denial, because that's also the strategy that he has been using so far, and quite successfully. He was trying to beat up the drum of outrage, resistance to the ICC. He has been trying to discredit the ICC officials, the institution. itself called it anti-Semitic, outrageous, etc. Putin more or less was doing the same, but maybe this step and what happened today would actually make some of the more intelligent advisors around him to change tack, or at least his old colleague and friend. Well, he's not really a friend. Yoav Gallant would perhaps consider surrendering himself to the ICC and fighting his own case in court, or maybe he would consider cooperating with the prosecution.
Maybe interesting, Steph, can you kind of run through any other examples you might think from international courts that might provide a bit of a playbook for how this might play out in the future?
It's hard to say, but we've seen different kind of styles. The ICC also indicted the sitting president in Kenya, and he turned up voluntarily and essentially kind of made sure that the case got thrown out. So that was a win for like turning up and facing the courts. In other cases that we've covered extensively, the trial of Slobodan Milosevic, Charles Taylor, the former Liberian president, and also Chadian dictator Hassan Habre, they were all forced into court after they lost power. And so I've been asked a lot these past days whether I think I will ever see Netanyahu in The Hague, and I have learned to never say never. And you just don't know what happens after regime change or when political alliances change, or some of your former allies might turn on you.
And coming up in The Hague in a couple of weeks' time is the annual meeting of the court, the Assembly of States Parties. That will be an opportunity to see what states have to say there. And I'm just going to give a bit of a dig now. I wonder whether they'll provide any funds in the same way as they did for Ukraine for the court to be able to do its work in this case. So here's Sergei.
The situation in the state of Palestine is the true litmus test for the credibility and authority of the International Criminal Court, because it is one thing to issue an arrest warrant against Putin, who is regarded widely as the enemy of the free world, as the dictator, as the head of state that committed aggression against a neighboring country. Of course, the ICC was very generously supported by states parties, by international organizations. Additional funds were provided, which set a sort of a benchmark. I'm very curious to see if the same degree of support would be provided in relation to the current situation, and how the position of certain states parties that were very much on the side of Israel would change now that we have these arrest warrants in place. I would expect them to act as the Netherlands said it would act. But of course, these are words. We also need to see real action. That's why I'm saying that it is a battle for the body of international criminal law.
So thank you so much to Sergei for responding on the fly yesterday. And thank you, Steph, for in between, God knows how many courts you have to cover each day, but in between all of your court coverage, for managing to chat.
You're welcome. I love to talk about this stuff, as you know. That's why we have the podcast. So it would feel amiss if I couldn't make time for that in the middle of my kind of on-the-fly journalist role. But I have this. I was cycling here through a very, very windy The Hague, and I had this image of when I was young, you could watch Sesame Street, and you had Kermit the Frog as a kind of roving reporter for Sesame Street News, was always in a Macintosh raincoat being kind of wind blown somewhere. And I was like, this is just going to be me. I need to have a Macintosh raincoat to make this. That hasn't happened, but I made it. And we're going to be talking about these warrants and this case and developments in a long time, because I think what happens next is also going to be that Israel is going to raise more legal challenges to all of this.
I agree with you. Maybe an early Christmas present again, or a Sint, because you're living in the Netherlands, present can be, we shall put the call out for your family to supply you with a Kermit-style rain Macintosh for your endeavours in The Hague. Anyway, see you again soon, and we will carry on podcasting.
Yes, thank you.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.